First Contact and Misconceptions. High Admiral Vexthor of the Kelthori Alliance stood before the massive holographic display, his crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the soft blue light of tactical readouts. The human solar system sprawled before him, a detailed three-dimensional map showing every defensive position Earth had established. His analytical mind catalogued each installation with growing disdain. Projectile weapons. He chittered to his strategic director, Melera. Their orbital platforms still use chemical propellants and metal slugs. How quaint. The word dripped with condescension as he gestured at the crude defense satellites circling the blue planet. Melera, her own crystalline form more delicate than the Admiral's, moved closer to study the readouts. The humans appear to have maintained many technologies we abandoned centuries ago. Their entire defensive doctrine seems built around kinetic weapons, electromagnetic systems, and crude nuclear devices. The bridge of the Kelthori flagship, Eternal Dawn, hummed with activity as the invasion fleet prepared for what they assumed would be a swift conquest. The Kelthori had subjugated 17 spacefaring civilizations in the past decade alone, each victory achieved through their superior technology. Quantum-locked energy shields, dark matter projectors, and consciousness disruption fields that could disable entire armies without destroying infrastructure. "Show me their most advanced weapon system," Vexthor commanded. The hologram shifted, focusing on a massive orbital platform near Earth's moon. Is this some kind of joke? They're using rotating barrel systems to accelerate projectiles. These railguns are barely more sophisticated than throwing rocks. A junior tactical officer approached, mandible plates clicking nervously. "High Admiral, our analysis suggests they've made some modifications to these basic designs. The energy signatures are unusual." "Unusual how?" Vexthor turned his compound eyes toward the officer. "They're incorporating gravitational elements into their projectile weapons, sir. Something we've never seen before. It's as if they're combining obsolete technology with modern principles." Vexthor finished, amused. How characteristic of younger races. They discover one advanced concept and think they can salvage their outdated systems by grafting new ideas onto old frameworks. The bridge crew chittered in agreement, sharing their commander's amusement. The Kelthori prided themselves on their purely energy-based weapon systems, having long ago abandoned physical projectiles as barbaric and inefficient. Their ships carried no solid ammunition, no crude explosive compounds, only the most sophisticated quantum weaponry in the known galaxy. Melera pulled up additional data streams, her crystalline fingers dancing through the holographic interface. Their ground-based defenses followed the same pattern: High Admiral, ballistic missiles, conventional explosives, and these curious hybrid weapons. They seem to have focused on improving ancient technologies rather than developing entirely new ones. A sign of their technological immaturity, Vexthor declared. They cling to the familiar rather than embracing true advancement. This will make our conquest even easier than anticipated. He expanded the tactical display, highlighting key strategic targets across Earth's surface. Their attachment to these outdated weapons will be their undoing. Our shields are calibrated against energy weapons thousands of times more sophisticated than anything they possess. But something nagged at the edge of Vexthor's consciousness, a detail in the data that seemed out of place. The energy readings from Earth's defense systems showed patterns he'd never encountered in all his years of conquest. The humans weren't just using old technology. They were using it in ways that defied conventional military doctrine. "Launch a probe," he commanded suddenly. "I want detailed scans of their nearest orbital platform." The probe launched silently into space, its quantum sensors reaching out to analyze the human defensive installation. Data streamed back to the Eternal Dawn, painting a picture that made several bridge officers shift uncomfortably. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, "the humans have somehow merged their gravitational technology with their projectile weapons in a way that, well, our computers can't quite predict how they'll perform against our shields." Vexthor dismissed the concern with a wave of his crystalline arm. "It doesn't matter. Our shields have never failed against any weapon system we've encountered. These humans, with their hybrid abominations of military technology, will learn the price of technological stagnation. He issued orders to the fleet. They would begin their attack in 12 Earth hours. The invasion would start with a demonstration of power, the destruction of Earth's crude orbital defenses. It would show the humans the futility of resistance and the superiority of pure energy-based warfare. As the fleet moved into position, Mel-Era approached her commander one final time. "High Admiral, there is one other peculiarity in our scans. The humans have been watching us since we entered their system, but they've made no attempt to communicate or negotiate. They've simply continued to adjust their weapons and defensive positions with remarkable precision. They recognize the inevitability of their defeat," Vex Thor replied confidently. "Their silence is merely acceptance of their fate." But as he studied the tactical display one final time, he noticed something that gave him pause. The humans weren't positioning their forces in any defensive pattern he recognized. Instead, they seemed to be arranging their platforms and satellites in a configuration that made no strategic sense, unless they knew something about their hybrid weapons that the Kelphori had overlooked. The High Admiral pushed the thought aside. After all, how dangerous could simple chunks of metal be to a civilization that had mastered quantum warfare? He would have his answers soon enough. The gravity of their mistake. The first sign that something was wrong came when the Kelphori's forward scouts disappeared, not through any dramatic explosion or energy discharge. They simply vanished from tactical displays, their quantum signatures snuffed out like candles in a storm. "Impossible," Vex Thor muttered, his crystalline form vibrating with tension. "Run a diagnostic on our sensor arrays." "Sensors are functioning perfectly, High Admiral," Mel-Era reported, her own confusion evident in the rapid clicking of her mandibles. "The scout ships are gone. No debris field, no energy discharge, nothing." Before Vex Thor could process this development, the humans made their first move. Their primitive orbital platforms began rotating in perfect synchronization, creating what appeared to be overlapping fields of gravitational distortion. The Kelphori's quantum sensors registered the phenomenon as a cascade of spatial anomalies, but the readings made no logical sense. "They're using their railguns as gravitational anchors," the tactical officer announced, his crystalline appendages trembling as he interpreted the data. "Each projectile they fire carries its own localized gravity well, but the pattern they're creating—" Vex Thor watched in growing concern as the humans launched their first coordinated attack. Instead of firing directly at the Kelphori fleet, their platforms released salvos of projectiles that seemed to miss by astronomical distances. But as each round passed through the carefully orchestrated gravitational fields, its trajectory bent and accelerated in ways that defied conventional physics. "Evasive action," Vex Thor commanded, but it was too late. The first wave of human projectiles, now moving at relativistic speeds through the engineered gravity wells, struck the Kelphori's quantum shields. The results defied everything the aliens knew about defensive technology. The shields didn't fail. They shattered. The carefully calibrated quantum fields, designed to dissipate energy weapons, couldn't cope with objects moving through multiple layers of warped spacetime. Each impact created a cascading failure that rippled through the shield grid, leaving the Kelphori ships exposed. "How?" Mel-Era demanded, her usual composure cracking. "Their weapons are based on prehistoric principles. They're firing metal slugs." A senior science officer, his crystalline form dulled with stress, spoke up. "They've weaponized gravity itself, Director. Each projectile is relatively simple, yes, but they're using our own assumptions against us. Our shields are optimized to handle energy dispersal across quantum fields. These humans are manipulating the fabric of space to turn simple kinetic impacts into something far more devastating." Vex Thor watched as another wave of human projectiles maneuvered through the gravity maze they'd created. The Kelphori fleet's advanced targeting systems couldn't track objects moving through such distorted space, making conventional countermeasures useless. His ships, the pride of the Alliance, were being systematically dismantled by technology he'd dismissed as obsolete. "Launch the consciousness disruption field generators," he ordered. "Let's see how well they handle attacks on their minds rather than their machines." The Kelfori ships that still had power deployed their most insidious weapons, devices that could overwhelm organic brains with quantum noise, rendering entire populations unconscious. The invisible fields expanded toward Earth's defensive grid. And for a moment, Vexthor allowed himself to hope. But the humans had dared. By creating carefully calculated gravitational disruptions, they were using the Earth's rotational energy as a weapon. Massive tidal forces rippled through space, catching Kelfori ships in their grip. But the humans had anticipated this too. Their orbital platforms suddenly emitted powerful electromagnetic pulses, precisely calibrated to interact with the consciousness disruption fields. The combination created an unexpected resonance that turned the Kelfori's own weapon against them. Across the fleet, crystalline crews stumbled as their neural patterns experienced interference they'd never evolved to resist. "They're not just using gravity," the science officer realized, his voice filled with reluctant admiration. "They've studied exactly how our quantum technology works and found ways to counter it using fundamental physical principles. We've been approaching warfare through the lens of energy manipulation, while they've been exploring the basic forces of the universe itself." Vexthor watched as another squadron of his ships succumbed to the humans' impossible attacks. The pristine vessels, armed with the most sophisticated energy weapons in known space, were being defeated by what amounted to incredibly clever rocks. "Send the dark matter projectors forward," he commanded, his voice carrying an edge of desperation. "Surely they can't have found a way to counter." His words were cut short as new data flooded the tactical displays. The humans had begun launching what appeared to be simple nuclear devices, another prehistoric weapon that should have been easy to counter. But as these warheads detonated, they created precisely calculated interference patterns in the fabric of space-time, turning the Kelfori's dark matter weapons into cosmic boomerangs. "High Admiral," Mel said quietly, "I believe we may have significantly underestimated human technological innovation. They haven't refused to advance. They've simply chosen a different path. While we focused on achieving pure energy manipulation, they explored ways to combine fundamental forces in ways we never considered possible." Vexthor's compound eyes studied the tactical display, watching as his mighty fleet was systematically dismantled by weapons he'd dismissed as relics. The humans hadn't just prepared for this battle. They'd orchestrated it, using the Kelfori's own technological arrogance as a weapon against them. And as another wave of gravity-accelerated projectiles approached through warped space, the High Admiral realized this was only the beginning of his education in human ingenuity. Learning the hard way, what remained of the Kelfori fleet regrouped in high orbit, their crystalline ships bearing scars from weapons they'd never expected to fear. High Admiral Vexthor had lost a third of his forces to the humans' gravity-enhanced projectiles, but he refused to accept defeat. If the orbital defenses had shown him humanity's tactical creativity, surely their planetary defenses would prove more conventional. "Begin atmospheric insertion," he commanded. "Their ground-based weapons can't possibly match the sophistication of their orbital platforms." Melera's tactical display showed thousands of human defensive installations scattered across Earth's surface. Most appeared to be simple missile silos, artillery batteries, and anti-aircraft installations, prehistoric technology that should have posed no threat to ships capable of manipulating quantum fields. "High Admiral," she ventured, "perhaps we should analyze their ground defenses more thoroughly before." The humans struck first. From installations near Earth's poles, they launched what appeared to be primitive missiles. The Kelfori's sensors initially dismissed them as no threat, until they began interacting with the planet's magnetic field in ways that defied conventional physics. "They're using Earth's magnetosphere as a weapon," the science officer reported, his crystalline form vibrating with disbelief. "Those missiles are creating controlled magnetic reconnection events. They're They're weaponizing their planet's natural defenses. Vexthor watched in horror as massive bursts of plasma, guided by the humans' magnetic manipulators, surged up from the ionosphere. His ship's quantum shields, already strained from the earlier battle, struggled to cope with the natural forces being turned against them. It wasn't just the raw power, it was the unpredictability of it all. How can they possibly control such chaotic forces? Mel-Era demanded, watching as another ship succumbed to a precisely guided plasma burst. The tactical officer's response was cut short as new warnings blared across the bridge. Along Earth's equator, massive installations had begun generating powerful gravitational pulses. But unlike the orbital platforms, these pulses weren't designed to redirect projectiles. They were manipulating the planet's own rotation. Impossible, Vexthor breathed. They wouldn't dare. Each rocket shed its initial propulsion system, revealing what appeared to be primitive nuclear engines. But these two were merely a transition phase. As they reached the upper atmosphere, the devices underwent another transformation, tapping into the magnetic fields they used earlier to create plasma channels through space. It's like watching technological evolution in real time, Mel-Era whispered. Each stage builds upon the previous one, using the most efficient method for each phase of flight. The human weapons approached the Kelthori fleet, and Vexthor watched in fascination as they transformed once again. The nuclear cores reconfigured themselves, establishing localized gravity wells that interacted with the larger gravitational network the humans had already created. They're not just combining technologies, the tactical officer realized. They're using each one to enhance the others. The chemical propulsion provided the initial thrust. The nuclear phase maintained acceleration. The magnetic fields guided them through our defenses. And now, the weapons executed their final transformation. What had started as simple rockets had become sophisticated gravity manipulators, each one carrying a payload that combined principles from dozens of different technological eras. When they detonated, they didn't just damage the Kelthori ships. They temporarily rewrote the laws of physics in localized stasis. How can they coordinate all of this? Vexthor demanded. The computational power required to calculate these interactions. His question was answered as new data streamed across the tactical displays. The humans weren't relying solely on advanced computers. They'd created a hybrid system that combined quantum processors with analog calculating machines, biological neural networks, and even simple mechanical computers. They're using everything, the science officer explained, his voice filled with wonder. Digital, analog, quantum, biological. Each type of computation handles the tasks it's best suited for. The mechanical computers provide reliable backup for critical functions. The biological systems handle pattern recognition. The quantum processors calculate gravitational interactions. Mel-Era's crystalline fingers danced across her console, analyzing the human approach. It's not just their weapons that combine old and new technologies. Their entire infrastructure is built on this principle. They haven't abandoned any technology that proves useful. They've found ways to make them all work together. The Kelthori watched as human fighters joined the battle, their designs a perfect example of this philosophy. The craft appeared almost primitive at first glance, with visible cockpits and aerodynamic surfaces that seemed unnecessary in space. But as they engaged, their true nature became clear. These weren't simply spacecraft. They were hybrid machines that could function equally well in space, atmosphere, or even underwater. Their hulls combined traditional materials with metamaterials that could adapt to different environments. Their weapons systems integrated everything from railguns to plasma projectors, each optimized for specific situations. Look at their pilots, the tactical officer noted. They're using direct neural interfaces, but they've backed them up with physical controls. If the advanced systems fail, they can still fly manually. Every critical system has multiple redundancies, using different technological principles. A human fighter demonstrated this versatility as it engaged a Kelthori cruiser. When its advanced targeting systems were jammed, it switched seamlessly to optical tracking. When its primary weapons were countered, It deployed simpler but equally effective alternatives. Every time the Kelthori adapted their defenses, the humans simply switched to a different technological approach. They're not just preserving old technologies, Vexthor realized. They're actively developing them alongside new ones. While we focused solely on advancing our energy weapons and quantum systems, they were exploring every possible path of technological development. The results of this approach were becoming increasingly clear. The Kelthori's highly advanced but specialized technology was proving vulnerable to humanity's diverse and integrated arsenal. Every time they thought they'd countered one type of weapon, the humans simply switched to another, or combined their technologies in new and unexpected ways. "High Admiral," Mel-Era reported, her voice grave, "we're detecting new energy signatures from the Earth's surface. They appear to be, well, we're not entirely sure what they are. The signatures suggest technologies from at least 5 different development eras, all working in concert." Vexthor studied the readings, his compound eyes taking in data that challenged everything he thought he knew about technological progress. The humans hadn't chosen between old and new technologies. They'd found ways to use them all, creating combinations that no single technological path could have produced. And as he watched another wave of hybrid weapons approach his fleet, the High Admiral finally understood why humans had kept their outdated weapons. They hadn't kept them out of sentiment or inability to advance. They'd kept them because they worked. Respect earned. The bridge of the Eternal Dawn had grown quiet, its crystalline surfaces reflecting the devastating results of humanity's multi-layered assault. High Admiral Vexthor stood before his tactical display, watching as the remains of his once proud fleet struggled against weapons that spanned centuries of technological development. "They're hailing us," Mel-Era announced, her voice carrying a note of surprise. "First direct communication since the battle began." Vexthor hesitated. His fleet was in ruins, defeated by a species he dismissed as technologically backward. Yet something in their approach to warfare had demonstrated a sophistication he'd never encountered before. "Accept the transmission," he commanded. The holographic display shifted, showing the human command center. Unlike the sterile, technology-dominated environments of Kelthori ships, this room was a striking blend of old and new. Holographic displays shared space with physical switchboards. Officers used neural interfaces while maintaining traditional communication systems as backups. The human commander appeared on screen, standing before a mechanical clock mounted alongside quantum time displays. "High Admiral Vexthor," she said, her voice calm and measured. "I am Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force. Are you prepared to discuss terms?" "Terms?" Vexthor's mandibles clicked in confusion. "You've effectively destroyed my fleet, yet you're offering terms." Admiral Chen smiled slightly. "We've demonstrated our defensive capabilities, yes, but destruction has never been our goal. We'd prefer to exchange knowledge rather than continue this conflict." Mel-Era moved closer to the display, her crystalline form reflecting the mixed lighting of both command centers. "Exchange knowledge? What could you possibly learn from us? You've countered every advanced technology we possess." "That's precisely why we want to talk," Chen replied. "Your quantum technology, your energy weapons, they're remarkable achievements. We'd like to understand them better, find ways to integrate them with our existing systems, and perhaps," she gestured to the diverse array of technology around her, "perhaps you might learn something from our approach as well." Vexthor studied the human command center more carefully now. Every piece of technology, whether ancient or modern, served a specific purpose. Nothing was maintained simply out of tradition or discarded merely because something newer existed. "Your weapons," he said slowly, "they're not just preserved relics. You're actively developing them alongside new technologies." Chen nodded. "Every technological path offers unique advantages. Chemical propulsion is reliable and simple to maintain. Kinetic weapons can't be jammed like energy weapons. Mechanical computers aren't vulnerable to quantum interference. But combine them with advanced technology, gravity manipulation, neural interfaces, quantum computing, and you create systems that are both sophisticated and resilient. The science officer stepped forward, his crystalline form vibrating with curiosity. The way you merged gravitational fields with ballistic weapons, used your planet's magnetic field as a defense system. We call it integrated technological development, Chen explained. Every new discovery is evaluated not just for its individual merit, but for how it might enhance or complement existing systems. We've found that the principles behind older technologies often suggest new ways to use advanced ones. Vexthor thought about his fleet's sophisticated but specialized weapons, now proven vulnerable to humanity's diverse arsenal. We abandoned our earlier technologies, he admitted, saw them as stepping stones to be discarded once we achieved higher levels of development. There's no such thing as obsolete technology, Chen replied. Only obsolete ways of thinking about it. Every principle, every mechanism, has potential value if you understand it well enough to use it creatively. The tactical display showed more human ships rising from Earth's surface, vessels that somehow managed to look both primitive and advanced simultaneously. Their hulls combined traditional materials with metamaterials. Their weapons ranged from electromagnetic railguns to quantum disruptors, and their very design philosophy challenged everything the Kelthori thought they knew about technological progress. Your terms, Admiral Chen, Vexthor asked finally. An exchange of knowledge. We'll help you understand our integrated approach to technology, and you can help us improve our understanding of quantum mechanics and energy manipulation. Together, we might develop entirely new combinations of technologies that neither of our species could create alone. Melera's crystalline form shifted, reflecting her changing perspective. You're not interested in merely defeating us. You want to learn from us, even after we try to conquer your world. The pursuit of knowledge should transcend conflict, Chen answered. We've shown you our defensive capabilities not to humiliate, but to demonstrate that there are always new ways to think about old ideas. Vexthor looked at his crew, seeing in their crystalline faces the same realization he'd come to. The humans hadn't just defeated them, they'd shown them a completely different way of thinking about technological advancement. Every weapon they'd encountered, every defensive system they'd faced, represented not just technological innovation but philosophical insight. We accept your terms, Admiral Chen, Vexthor declared, though I suspect we have far more to learn from you than you from us. Chen smiled again. Don't be so sure, High Admiral. The Kelthori's achievements in quantum physics and energy manipulation are remarkable. Imagine what we might create by combining your pure energy approach with our integrated systems. As the human admiral spoke, Vexthor noticed something that perfectly symbolized humanity's approach to technology. Admiral Chen was wearing a simple mechanical wristwatch alongside her advanced neural interface. Both served their purpose, both were valued for their unique properties, and together they represented a philosophy that had fundamentally changed his understanding of progress. The humans hadn't kept their outdated weapons out of nostalgia or limitation. They'd kept them because they understood a truth that Kelthori had forgotten. True advancement wasn't about replacing the old with the new, but about finding ways to make everything work together. And in that understanding lay the key to possibilities neither species had yet imagined.